So we're here to not so much remember Art Young as much as to discover him. He's been dead a long time. Art passed away in 1943. He was so dynamic that didn't stop him from doing a cartoon for 1944, which I'll show at the end of my slideshow. He was so upset with Hitler that even though he was dead, he did a hell of a drawing. He was born in 1866, right after the Civil War. So when you think about it, Art Young's life extended from a kind of pre-industrial America to the time when America takes over as the preeminent superpower in the world. Commensurate with that was the coming of the Industrial Revolution and all of the injustices that attended that. And he starts off as a Republican sort of a guy, which at that time, at the end of the 19th century, didn't necessarily mean you were conservative. A Republican meant that you kind of liked Mr. Lincoln, and you liked the idea of a union, and you didn't like slavery. But as he went along, Art recognized that injustice was not going to be addressed by usual politics, and he became more and more radicalized as he went along. So I'm going to briefly jump along his life so that we can just get a grounding of where he's from and what happens to him. And each of my colleagues will then give you their own presentation and interpret art for themselves in their own way. This is the cover of the beautiful new book that we are celebrating. Anel, are you here? Okay. Anel, is this available in the shop?
The book is available for sale.
Yes, okay. Art and I don't know if Anita has worked with Fantagraphics. Have you had anything published? I think this is one of their finest achievements. Wouldn't you agree?
It's beautiful. I never worked for Fantagraphics.
You never did any Fantagraphics? Okay. You're one of the, like many of us, fans of Fantagraphics. This book is absolutely gorgeous, and I highly recommend it. It will absorb you. But most of all, what it does is it reminds us of what political art is, what it can be, what it has done, how brilliant it can be, what the potential of it is. So this is the cover of the book. Here is how Art generally drew himself. Very cherubic. And I think this rendering of himself, this kind of self-portrait, was more of a portrait of the way he was inside, his internal life, as opposed to the way he really looked. All the pictures of him that I see, actual photos of him, show a person who is deep in thought, troubled perhaps by what's going on in the world. So I just thought for the occasion I would draw him based on the photos that I've seen of Art Young. He reminds me of a lot of old lefties that I've known in my life who, maybe on a scale that we don't have today or we don't see very much today, consider their politics to be absolutely part of the lifeblood of their existence. And they fought for causes. They get arrested. They throw their bodies down for strikers and for poor people and take risks in a way that we haven't before and probably are about to start again. There is no better time to celebrate Art Young than now. So he's a young person, and he's interested in art just naturally. He's a completely compulsive drawer, encounters a copy of Dante's Inferno illustrated by Gustave Doré. It becomes a calling for him. He's growing up in the Midwest in Chicago, and as a young man, remember he's born in '66, so in '86, we have the Haymarket riots. And we have a national awakening about what's happening in labor and how that's being treated by police and the powers that be. He becomes, gradually over time, a socialist. He is working for various publications in the Midwest, He winds up being coming to New York, working at the Art Students League, and getting work at Life, Puck, and Judge. It is at that time that Art Young gets to meet his heroes. Puck is, at that time in the 80s and 90s, the most popular and important political journal, not a radical journal, but an entertainment magazine that cast the characters of the day as various, bless you, as various thematic characters in circuses and shows and operas and Shakespeare, and done with meticulous care and tremendous skill by Joseph Kepler and his people. Kepler published it, and Art got to be a part of that scene. Here is an example of his use of tone. All the way through, we're going to talk about his craft. And I'm astounded as I look through the book at his varying levels of courage, or his great courage all the time at different skills, different media that he attacks. So here is a fantastic drawing. Just look at that horse. Look at the deftness of it. Look at how much care there is, but care done with great economy. He was, in addition to all the passion that you're going to see today, and all the dynamism of his ideas, he's also a marvelous illustrator and a marvelous draftsman. This is an early example of his work. When he was in Chicago, he was working for Chicago papers and covering the Chicago World's Fair and the Chicago Political Convention of 1892. 1892 is an important year because right after that convention comes what was called at that time the Great Depression. I don't know too many people who know this, but it was until the 30s a huge depression that came rolling across the United States from the railroads and coal, which had overinvested. There was a bubble. And then the result was massive unemployment and then massive political upheaval, which resulted ultimately, gradually, in the Progressive Era. Progressive Era comes in the late 90s, early 1900s, and here's Art Young perfectly poised to take advantage of this. When governors and senators and congressmen and mayors all over the country are being elected who are socialists. It's hard for us to understand this today, but they were proud to be calling themselves socialists. They believed in labor unions and supporting them. And Art Young was kind of in the mainstream of all this. It hit its ultimate moment with Theodore Roosevelt becoming president. And even after Roosevelt, whose next president, his successor was William Howard Taft, and then after him, Woodrow Wilson, the Progressive Era just kept rolling along. Child labor laws, pure food and drug, the vote for women, all this stuff came out of that time. And it all came to a screeching halt at World War I. And it came to a screeching halt in the middle of Art Young's career. This is his view of war, and another application of pen and ink, feeling very modern, as is this. This is one of my favorite Art Young pieces, how fear can grip a population and cow them into submission and silence. And to me, so many of these pieces feel like experiences that we're having today. This really reminds me of what was going on during the Iraq War, how people lost their jobs, were fired, and was silenced because there was a general consensus to not challenge what was happening. And we may be having this again, although I'm not predicting that we are, because I think we are more like Art Young than Donald Trump. Incredibly, this is his view of marriage. His own marriage didn't go very well. He had 2 children, but was divorced and preferred not to be married. But this is a statement where he clearly saying that this is something that is not good for women. Here's a piece that Art and I were talking about before about comparing the hooded heads to the ordinary people behind them. This is a piece that made a big impact. It is a view of the church and its holdings. This ran, believe it or not, in the very staid Puck magazine, and it looked like, was it Trinity? And here's what it looked like when it ran. But you can just look at that line work, and it's so extraordinary. After this ran, the Catholic Church bulldozed those homes, those slums. So embarrassed were they by Art Young's portrayal. Here's a comic by him, so he's doing comics as well as everything else. He is really a four-letter man when it comes to illustration and cartoon. The story of how a young person becomes radicalized. He has a very hard time on the job, and nobody gives a damn. Here's an animal rights piece. I think Anita's going to talk about this. Another one, comparing the treatment of people and the treatment of animals, and he's feeling deeply about all of it. Here is a representation of the capitalist system and how it lures people into the crevices and the canyons of Wall Street. And interesting how that composition is adapted to one of his most famous pieces, which is this one, Having Their Fling. Has anybody seen this piece before? Is this famous to any of you? All right. It's an important piece because it was on the basis of this picture that Art Young and the masses were hauled into court, and there was a trial that took place. It was Art Young, Max Eastman, John Reed, and a few others. And I did a little research into this, and I'm going to read you just a little tiny bit of the testimony from that trial. The trial was kicked off by this fellow. This is a piece by me from another project. Mitchell Palmer, who was the Attorney General of the United States, who under Woodrow Wilson decided that he would establish the Espionage Act, which, as you know, is still in play today in the United States and is still a danger to all of us. If you are deemed to be a threat and a danger to the state, they can prosecute you. So he was sent into this trial. Both trials, there were two trials, both of them ended in a hung jury. And there was a conspiracy to obstruct the recruiting and establishment of service in the United States, quote unquote, and for the publication of seditious articles, cartoons, and poems. Each of these defendants were facing 20 years and fines up to $10,000, which was a very large sum back then. And without a trial, the masses' second-class mailing permit was revoked. During this time, Art Young, just because he was accused, was dismissed as a worker, as an artist for a magazine called The Metropolitan. He says, "I was simply illustrating General Sherman's statement that war is hell," and that the jury was on the verge of finding them guilty. On the first trial, it was hung at 11-1. The second trial was held in September of 1918, so we're at the 100th anniversary of this travesty. And he reminisced, and he said, "I'd like to nap during the trial." And as a result, I was charged with contempt of court. The lawyers would wake him up and give him some paper and pencils to draw with. And the result of that was a series of pictures that he did of his own trial. And here's Art snoozing while he was on trial. He said that I am antagonistic to the money-making fetish because of It sidetracks our natural selves, leaving us no alternative but to accept the situation and take any kind of work for a weekly wage. We are caught and hurt by this system. And the more sensitive of us are divorced from our highest values. And it forces us to bear abuse. So the prosecutor said to Young on the stand, "Mr. Young, what did you intend to do when you drew this picture?" Going back to that photo of the dancing capitalists. Art says, "Intend to do? Why, to draw a picture, make people laugh, make them think, to express their feelings." "Well, for what purpose?" Art says, "Well, for the public good." "How did you feel that this would affect such a purpose?" Art Young, "I do not think it is fair to ask an artist to go into metaphysics." "Did you intend to obstruct recruiting or enlistment?" And he mentioned a picture of Barnes, one of the attorneys, and that Young had drawn. And Art says, "Well, perhaps someone would think that I had drawn that picture of Barnes to keep him from enlisting." So at that, they dismissed him and he went back to his seat where he fell asleep. In summation, the attorney was waxing very poetic and very patriotic about what these people were doing at the masses. And he said the soldiers who were dead in France, think about one soldier. He died for Max Eastman. He died for John Reed. He died for Merrill Rogers. And Art spoke up in court at the end to mess up the guy's oration. He says, "What? He didn't die for me?" He was upset that he was left out of that whole thing. In those days, you would see big events like this to support anti-war. Haywood Broun, Smedley Butler, November 11th, Armistice Day. Masses was behind that. Again, his magnificent use of blacks and whites. Look how confident those lines are. Totally beautiful. And this to me looks like a lithograph, or at least a crayon drawing, imitating a lithograph. Here is the big parade, marches on. Really, a use of black and white that is rare in graphics and to be seen again very rarely. Here's a piece I found that's not in the book. By golly, I'm tired. There you go, you're tired. Here I be standing over a hot stove all day, and you're working in a nice cool sewer. I'm just enamored of the way he's drawing hands and the way he's giving you attitudes just by the positioning of the bodies. He's wonderful on all these levels. Those of you who know Puck magazine know that this is the style of Puck, but Art absolutely gives a new flavor to it. A double-page spread. These were lithos, color lithos, mastered by Kepler and Opper and others. He makes it his own with tremendous compositional power and intelligent use of color. Mother, when you were a girl, didn't you find it a bore to be a virgin? And Mother is nonplussed. I'm just loving all this in here. There's so much care here. This could have been done by Yuko Shimizu, I think. Not exactly, not the same kind of humor, but there is just a love of line quality. And look in here too. And attitude. He's got it all. He's the complete package.
I think that was in the New Yorker.
Was this in the New Yorker? Does anybody know? Francoise?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
It's.
I thought this one was in the masses when I looked it up.
I tell my students, look at line weight. Line weight will solve most of your problems. Now I'm going to tell them, look at Art Young. Look at this. I don't know where this appeared or where it's from, but it's just the cacophony of New York. And, you know, if you're not an illustrator and you're not a cartoonist, you're not thinking about how to organize masses of people and blacks and whites so that we see the whole and the particular too. And just look at that horse, right? And he's got everything right, but he's also choreographed this. Everything's a dance. And with art, it's the anger, the humor, and the beauty all together. It's all coming in together at the same time. It's a master. Here's my last slide. And that's that 1944 illustration done as a piece. I guess it might have been a card, a New Year's card. But he's responding to Hitler, and he is drawing beyond the grave. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Steve,
Yeah.
why is Hitler wearing a kilt?
Why is Hitler wearing a kilt?
Oh, it's Macbeth.
That's right.
Hi. So let's see. I'd like to say that this is a great book, but I don't like the introduction. It's written by me. And it was done when Fantagraphics thought that the book was about to come out and I had to produce something in record time. Then as the book dragged on for about another year, eventually I figured I need to say more and say it better. So I wrote something for Harper's Magazine in the run-up to the election, where the theme of that particular piece was, man, you know, if we only had Art Young now, maybe we wouldn't have had to worry about choosing between Hillary and Trump, you know, that his main theme throughout his life was the 99, well, not throughout his life, through his mature life, was the 1% versus the 99%. And this cartoon, which is one of the ones that really, okay, there it is. So this cartoon, to me, first of all, reminds me of something that Saul Steinberg once said, which is, when you make a good picture, once it's been seen, it can't be unseen. And every time I hear the word capitalism, there's this kind of greedy, teetering heap about to, it's called Capitalism, and the subtitle is The Last Supper. And one of the things that strikes me the most about this, aside from all the things that are absolutely true, is bold incline is really impressive. His stuff has a woodcut quality when he's drawing. It's carved, it's dimensional, it's there. But what really knocks me out is the pictures I've seen of Art Young, he is kind of genial. He's also rather roly-poly. And in order to draw this, he has to inhabit it. You know, this is not just somebody abstractly being greedy. It's like he put himself in the pose, clearly. He lifted a chalice of swill up to his own lips, and this is what he drew. And to me, this is the secret of Art Young and a kind of political cartooning that I find difficult to do, if at all, which is to have empathy, to have a way of identifying with the oppressor. This isn't, and I meant to bring a slide and I didn't, of Arthur Szyk. Did any of you see that show that's still up at the Museum of the City of New York? It's a small, really potent show. And as Szyk said about his own work, and I found Szyk very important when I was researching Mao's, if nothing else for the uniforms. They're so detailed and accurate. But the thing about Szyk is, as he said of himself, I'm a good hater. And that's like the polar difference, but you can see the show, which you should. If nothing else for its craft, he's a Persian miniaturist. These insanely detailed pictures are like 8 inches high. There's about 50 of them. It's kind of breathtaking in its own way. But what I admire here is the sheer overwhelming humanity of this artist. Okay. He was a very committed political artist. This is a drawing from the masses. And it's wonderful. It's like, gee, Annie, look at the stars, thick as bedbugs. I can't imagine a more potent plea for getting rid of those slums below Trinity Church than this kind of a picture, because it's it's drenched in empathy, and its first and primary thing is it's a humor thing. It's a cartoon. It's not forbidding. It's not one of those Soviet-style posters about the masses rising up to get what their due is. It's like, how could you not care about these? These are two sweet young people. They deserve better. And that, I think, is the essence of him for me, that like the humor, the politics, the sincerity comes through in everything that Art Young did. Here's a political cartoon. What's he been doing? Overthrowing the government. And I want to contrast that with one of his compatriots at the Masses. The Masses magazine is an incredible, beautiful experiment inspired by the European magazines like L'Assiette Burr and whatever, where the artist reigned supreme. And this with a very progressive, radical, even cluster of Greenwich Village bohemians, and it had a spectrum of artists in it. So Robert Minor was one of them, another good political cartoonist, maybe great in his own way, who did this picture, for example. Now what this is The Blasphemer, it's made in the early 20s, I guess, so it's after the Masses, but it's about a guy who's arrested for his radical Lithuanian magazine in America, and he's arrested. They have to get him on something, so they get him on blasphemy laws that are 300 years old that had never been used before in modern times. So that's his picture of what Art Young had shown you. What's interesting about the Art Young stuff is it's about a specific time and place, but it remains as useful now as it could be here. We're moving into the world of what political cartooning often does, which is what's kept me away from it, is it's got a shelf life of about 10 minutes. And then if it doesn't exist as an illustration for a history textbook, it disappears. So this is fine, but it's a very different approach than Robert Minor, who then went on to do, this was one from the Masses. It's pretty great in its own way. It's a political prize. I think it's one of the first Pulitzer Prize winning cartoons. Army Medical Examiner at Last, A Perfect Soldier. Minor became more and more politically engaged with the revolution as it happened and after, and ultimately stopped being a cartoonist to be a union organizer, a labor professional, rabble-rouser, communist, and was brilliant at that as well, but actually had less time and finally no time for his cartooning. And on the other hand, it's on the same frequency, like it's something that Art Young has a spectrum that definitely can move there, but without rancor, let's say. Now, the thing that's so cool, sorry, this is a little hard for me to manipulate. This is a cover of the Masses by Stuart Davis. And Stuart Davis, as you know, became kind of a Cubist modernist painter. And this has that kind of composition that like tells you this man knows what he's doing when he's moving space around. And what's interesting is the caption here, which says, gosh, Meg, think of us being on a magazine cover. So for me, it's happily Mad Magazine self-referential. I like that. What's really interesting is the text is probably by Max Eastman or Art Young, because in the bohemian world of the Masses magazines before the revolution, there was a revolution going on in the arts, the world that led to the Armory show and beyond. And Art Young wanted all pictures to have a meaning. It's not enough to have two people in a picture. But John Sloan, one of the major contributors to the Masses and an important modernist at the time, he wanted his pictures to be left alone. It's two people walking under the L. They don't need to have a caption to have a reason. And this was Art Young's dichotomy. There was actually a big battle at the Masses, which was supposed to be edited by all the contributors, but it boiled down to Max Eastman, who lost his radical politics over the year and became the editor of the really successful editor of Reader's Digest. Art Young was the editor. Even though everybody was supposed to choose things in meetings, everybody came to the meetings got totally drunk, and in the back room, a small handful of people, including Art Young, made the decisions of what would be in the magazine. And Art Young knew what art was, and he also knew that art has a purpose. It's supposed to be in service of society. It's not abstract picture making, which doesn't mean he's not interested in the abstraction of making a picture. It's just he has another calling. And in fact, there was he ran for office a couple of times. Unfortunately, he never won. But he's running for something in New York City. And he had a drawing that I didn't make a slide of, unfortunately. When he's running for office, it's him looking that cherubic way, but kind of sweating on a small platform, giving a talk. There's only about 4 people in the audience, and 2 of them are walking out. And it's called Uprising of the Proletariat. That's good. So this is the famous drawing that got the magazine busted. And when Art Young had that trial, he was interested in the trial until he found out he could not use smashing the state as a defense. He thought that, like, well, the founders, like, what is it, Madison or one of the founders, Jefferson, the one who said we need a revolution every few years, and so he thought that was the perfect defense. When that got, when he was told that just couldn't happen, that's when he started sleeping in the court. He had no interest in this thing past that moment. And what was interesting in the final trial of the masses was when that great set of orations about how these people have to be hanged was going on. The prosecutor ended up having to say, even Art Young, but of course everybody loves Art Young, which was true. So this is a cartoon that I'm sure was in the New Yorker. The other one is up for debate until I can get to see it again. But this one was a New Yorker cartoon that could be running now. It's about fake news. I think I'll take the murder. Now, you already saw some animal rights cartoons. One of the great things about Art Young and his empathies, he identifies with these animals. This is called There's a Divinity That Shapes Our Ends. And this one, which is pretty cool, and there's another one that for me is one of those major defining images of capitalism, From Jungle to Civilization, with the guy with his coconuts. And, you know, everything that Steve said about composition and expression and vividness of composition is still there. One thing that's worth pointing out is another one that will stand up just fine as a T-shirt today. A compulsory religion, fear of sickness, fear of poverty, and worshiping mammon. And this is part of his, basically, one of his 3 books that he did all his life. He did versions of Dante's Inferno as Art Young's Inferno. And these things are incredibly up to date. They get more and more political, but without losing their edge. Here, for instance, is a picture of, this one's called, it's one of the illustrations for the last of the Infernos, that's called Satan's Summer Palace, now owned by American millionaire. So it's Mar-a-Lago, but circa 19. But the thing about him is he was worth a better introduction, and I could say that everybody could find it for free if they look up Harper's and Art Young, because right before the election it's still online, and it's just more informed than a off-the-cuff thing. This is a cave for rent. After a hard day being tortured, you have to rent your fucking cave. Here's Art Young drawing his demons. They're posing for him. It's so endearing, that's this upside-down demon that he's sketching. And then here's something really interesting for me, is like, I think he's at the avant-garde, not just of possibly David Lowe, but there's something I've gotten interested in recently that has to do with what's happened to comics, right? By renaming them graphic novels, they managed to escape from being trivial. And there's a bunch of gag cartoonists over the years. I don't like the phrase, but it has done that. But what's happened over the years is a bunch of gag cartoonists, that form perfected by the New Yorker of the captioned cartoon, had a few people who were like restless. They wanted more. They could have been artistes, like Steinberg. If he wanted to, his pals were painters. He could have been a painter too. He's been shown in museums before most cartoonists might be. But what it was they were stretching to see what the gag cartoon could be when it wasn't just about delivering a joke. And that includes certainly Steinberg, certainly William Steig, who did these drawings of emotional and psychological states, and also someone weird like Abner Dean, who just had a book reprinted by New York Review of Books, who basically draws very much in the spirit of Peter Arno, but they're all naked except they don't have genitals, and it's also about psychological states. Beautifully done. Okay, so in a way, this cartoon is showing each of these devils with hypocrisy, vulgarity, bluff, is a clue to this. When Art Young moved to Connecticut to save money and was living in a rustic life, he began a series of drawings called Trees. This was in the period when nobody was publishing him because it's on the other side of the masses trial. He became kind of toxic. And he had taken a vow of poverty by being a radical cartoonist. But everybody loved Art Young. They wanted to find ways to use him. And one of the ways, I think it was Collier's or Life, that found a way to use him was Art Young's Trees. This one is the Devil's Orchestra. And this one is Goodbye Summer. So this weeping willow is totally weeping. He's drawing the trees that he's seeing silhouetted outside his country home in Bethel, I think it is, that has actually a museum built in the town hall for Art Young now, worth a visit. And what they are is they're using that cartoon skill to do emotional states, to show something that has a kind of permanence, and it's as close as he can come without violating his own interests and principles to being an artiste by turning the gag cartoon, before any of the other names I mentioned, into something worth keeping. My politics led me to things like this, radicalizing the new young kids back in the 80s. But I actually had no specific interest in it as a category, any more than I had an interest when I was looking in Playboy magazine. There'd be after I finished with whatever you're not supposed to look at as a kid, because I got it since Harvey Kurtzman was drawing for it, and he was my idol, the man who created Mad. Then they'd have pieces of humor, and it would say satire in the contents page. And nothing can kill satire faster than having it rubber stamped and labeled. So similarly, I think political cartoon is an anathema of a label, because it tells you, hey, it's boring, nothing to see here, move on, move on. And this was the part of his problem. The reason he had a book in 1936 and only has another one now in 2018, after the best of Art Young had been published and long fallen out of print, was he was a radical political cartoonist. Can you imagine a bigger losing trifecta? So let me see what to show you. I was reluctant to even bring my own work because I'm just not that kind of creature in some ways. But, clearly this had a political meaning at its moment. First cover I did for The New Yorker that helped allow these magnificent Barry Blitt things to be happening now. Of course, The New Yorker cover should stir up trouble. It's not just a picture of a cat on a windowsill. So this one was in the wake of Crown Heights. And as judging from the fact that all the young people are elsewhere, you probably remember when Crown Heights was a racial hotbed of race war, basically.
5 years?
Yeah. It's a long time. So now the cover is actually still rather beloved because, isn't it nice to see black people and white people kissing? But at the time it didn't seem...
They're not entirely white,
I know, but they are if you ask any black person. But here, this cover made more trouble at the time it came out than anything that could happen before the internet. It was published internationally, well beyond the frame of why don't these two people coming to bloody blows with each other just kiss and make up on Valentine's Day. And I was excoriated for this when it came out, partially because of context. If I'd done it for the Village Voice or something, no problem. But the New Yorker was a very genteel magazine at the time. Scenes of Connecticut countryside, even on the cover that had John Hersey's article on Hiroshima. But here, not only was it a close-up, and most of the New Yorker covers were middle distance or long shots, except for the Eustace Tilley one, which is what inspired me rather than the politics to a degree. I just wanted to know, what would Eustace Tilley look like if he was Jewish? And this doodle appeared. And it allowed this image to happen that got everybody angry at me, which was, in a sense, like bringing the two sides together like I wanted, like the Jewish community was upset because, a Jew can't even touch his wife in public. I think at the same time, a black reverend was on the radio yelling at me, and I was asked to respond. I don't remember what the talk show was, saying, like, if this artist had any guts, he'd show a black man kissing a Jewish lady, because here, one more time, you got like the white man exploiting the black woman. And my response was, you may be a good reverend, I'm not sure, but you would be a terrible art director, because nobody would recognize a woman with a handkerchief on her head as readily as this. And then in the New York Times, there was an article on the op-ed page the day after. A woman was almost apoplectic. She taught English at Queens College, and she couldn't write clear sentences even with their copy editing, because she was angry about everything about this cover, including one thing that was about, in describing the picture, the Jews' prim lips. Same day in the Washington Post, a rabbi was talking about the Jews' lascivious lips. And I confess, I'm not a great draftsman. I can't do them prim and lascivious at the same time. I wouldn't know how. So it was clear that this became a kind of Rorschach test. And the proof of that was cartooning as a language does require a lot of background information. Best letter that came into the magazine was from a young girl saying she thought it was really sweet. It was for Valentine's Day. It was really sweet that on Lincoln's birthday, there was a picture of Lincoln kissing a slave. Okay, so am I near my 15 minutes? I don't need to. I'm going to just not show my. No, 2. You misread. Well, I'm going to cut to I'm going to skip all the New Yorker cover stuff, and I'm going to show you an artist who I think is really important to think about these days, which is Philip Guston. Philip Guston famously renounced a successful career, not exactly the way Art Young did, but got himself equally excoriated and exiled, because rather famously incidentally, Art Young started his path toward becoming more and more radical as he got older after having a successful career. In that first newspaper he worked for in Chicago, he was Thomas Nast's understudy, basically, the second artist on the paper, and he'd been sent to cover the Haymarket affair, and specifically the anarchists who were in prison who were going to be hanged the next day. And so he went and drew them and talked with them and came out really depressed, but did his drawing. And this led to him always feeling guilty and regretting what he had done, and it pushed him further and further toward his radical politics. Anyway, here's Philip Guston. Philip Guston, as a young man, about 20, was doing these Klansmen and being inspired by the Mexican mural artists and making murals. And he had gone to high school with a pal, Jackson Pollock, who said, you ought to come to New York, the weather's fine. And it led him into being one of the great second-generation Abex artists, highly admired for that. And he played with and moved more and more toward this kind of lush palette, very delicate abstract expressionist art, and couldn't stand it after a while. Like Art Young, it's like, I want to draw pictures of something. When he was young and when Jackson Pollock were young, they both wanted to be cartoonists. Guston even took a how to draw cartoons course, and in their correspondence, I got really new respect for Philip Guston when, as a young man, he writes a letter to Pollock and says, so who was the good artist who did Slim Jim on the Force, which was a Sunday paper? This is a strip that nobody remembers the bad artist on even.
Who Pollock's teacher was.
Yeah, Thomas Hart Benton. Yeah.
Who never understood what happened to Pollock. He was sympathetic, but he didn't understand.
But in this case, the artist that he's admiring and trying to find the name of is a great cartoonist, but he died at 26 of tuberculosis, so nobody knows about this guy, a guy named Raymond Ewer. But the commitment to cartoon art was real. And so unlike Jackson Pollock, who I don't have much use for, what Guston did was return to his roots, to Crazy Cat, to Mutt and Jeff, to, I believe, seeing Robert Crumb catalyzing all this, but that's not something I can get away with in Guston crowds. They either bury it or just decide I'm a dope. But in any case, I thought this picture is the one I needed to really show you as what it means to have empathy. He clearly hates the Klan. He hates, although he disguised his new Jewish name Goldstein by calling himself Guston, he was aware of the history of the Klan, and he wasn't cozying up to it in any way. But here's a self-portrait of the artist at his drawing table. And it's understanding that there's a Klansman in all of us under the hood, which is what started that conversation about what looks like every man, and then above hovering these spooky Klan people in that Art Young show that Steve showed you. So what really knocked me out was during the period where he first was showing these paintings that are the same. You know, they have the same palette, the same approach. He's living in exile up in Woodstock, New York, because basically he's been shunned by, he's an apostate. I mean, to not be an abstract artist after the invention of abstract expressionism is just to be a mere illustrator, a buffoon. He was dismissed by Hilton Kramer as a mandarin pretending to be a stumblebum. And a lot of his friends abandoned him. His galleries didn't really want to hear much from him. He was in exile in Woodstock, New York, where he had another friend, Philip Roth, who was there and remained a friend, young Philip Roth, right after having written Portnoy, who was his pal up there. He was in exile from just not wanting to make jokes about don't shake hands with this guy. He wrote Portnoy. So they both had as an important part of their interaction, hating Nixon. I know it's hard to understand in the age of Trump because Nixon looks like one of the great politicians and statesmen of all time, but there's good reason to hate him. And it led Guston to write Poor Richard, to do Poor Richard, this collection of drawings, and Roth to do what became his novel Our Gang, which still is kind of funny if you could want to bother. But here, Poor Richard is these characters that include a Nixon that looks like a cross between Crazy Cat and a penis, Agnew, who's just a pinhead, John Mitchell, who's like a flaccid penis with a pipe, and Kissinger is just a pair of glasses. And he wasn't doing this knowing that he was going to publish it. It's just that's what he was doing, was these drawings, going back to his cartoon past and making real pictures. This is maybe a clearer picture of the relationship between Kissinger and Nixon. And here we have the Klan theme is still alive and well. And this painting is one of the very only two paintings that came out of this round of work. And it's an amazing painting. This is as great for me as the capitalism picture I started with. He famously had, what was it called? I'm running a... Thank you, phlebitis. And I thought this picture is amazing. He couldn't have hated Nixon more, right? He really couldn't. This was visceral. So here's that leg that looks like a map of some war zone country. His bandages turning into like talons or claws. This insanely inflated leg. Him horizontally bent over with this kind of statesman-like or Napoleonic arms behind his back. And there's the dick with his scrotum. And there's this tear. And on the one hand, it's that shit, he's like a self-pitying monster. But it's also like he's doing that, and then you can see somewhere in this painting he's going, wow, that must really hurt, man. And that's an amazing thing to have pulled off, I believe, in terms of empathy and art. I think I'm probably, I did about my stint, right? I'm not going to show more of my work. Wait, there's one last thing I should show you because I think it's important in terms of me disparaging political art. I want to put in a plug for my dear wife and daughter, because they did this amazing thing after Françoise was left bereft of her New Yorker cover that showed Hillary looking out the window of the Oval Office that ran actually as an illustration later in a David Remnick take down maybe a little bit of Hillary. But this so idealistic, like, was just done in record time, and unlike Raw magazine that Francoise and I did, it wasn't trying to find the creme de la creme de la creme, the artists all around the world who were working on comics in a new way. This included every intersectional possibility they could get to draw a picture, from grandmas to like young children, from skilled New Yorker artists to people who had never published before, asking women, what do you think we should be, how are you feeling, you know? And I petitioned for and got a man cave, but what's great about this was just like everybody rallying around in a print publication in the world of things last 3 seconds while the pixels are focused, and that's it. So basically, my problem was I was more like this. This was in my sketchbook. And I never quite managed it. It's just I was drawing Mutt and Jeff a lot. But I did petition for a man cave, and we had a small section in the back for that. This was Telling of the Frog Prince. And the problem with this for me is just, it's fine. Like, don't believe in fairy tales, resist. But unless this could be put up on every bus kiosk in a swing state, all it is like, you know, hey, we'll get through this together, gang. Aren't those people jerks? And instead of becoming more empathic, I just got to hate the jerks, you know, as well as the big jerks, the littler jerks, the ones who've bought into this thing, where we were told you have to try to understand them so you can win them over. I didn't want to win them over. I wanted to see them die.
We understand them, that's why.
Because we have that Klansman inside us. But here, nearly half the country supports the large orange turd in the White House. They've got shit for brains and it's leaking out the top of their heads. True, but if you don't get off my hat, I'll be mistaken for one of them. This was just a sketchbook, never went further than that. But it's build a Walmart, Black Lives Spatter, make me a Great Dane again, make me great again. I don't want your stinking health care, grab my wallet, and probably a few others. So the best I was able to do with a bad hand of not being able to figure out what to do, since I was really interested in drawing Mutt and Jeff, liking the first daily comic strip ever was Mud and Jizz in Executive Ordure, which says, ugh, what's that awful stench? It's our president. The president? How can a large bowel movement even sign an executive order? Tiny hands, of course. Not tiny, huge. You're an idiot, Jizz. Right, and he represents us. Huge hands, not tiny. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, I just want to, I wish we could do more like these. I think we need to talk more about art and politics. I really do. I mean, I really want to believe that art can change things and change people's minds. I get really depressed sometimes when I think about, the internet and these feedback loops that we have. These, like the only people that we talk to on the internet are people who we agree with, and it's dangerous. And I think in the past, there was for instance one single news source. And, and it was, they were, oh God, I'm going to go off on a tangent now. I just want to say this is so important. I think, can we please do this more often? Just talk about art and politics and how we can change things. I don't know. I'm Canadian, so I grew up in a semi-socialist country. To me, this is normal. The work of Art Young is normal. I mean, I think, resisting is normal. That's the whole point of a democracy. So when I was young, I was looking at work by the wonderful Käthe Kollwitz. Is this going to work? Yes. And then, of course, the other than the Schick show, I would encourage you, I don't know if it's still up, but the wonderful Käthe Kollwitz and Sue Coe show that's at Galerie Saint-Étienne. I don't know if it's still up, but I mean, it's extraordinary. And, Sue Coe, Steve wanted us to talk about people who influenced me. Certainly she influenced me. Her work was all about change and creating meaning and exposing some of the the horrible things that are going on in the world. so I always loved her work, the authenticity of it, and I think I love her work. It's very, again, it's really authentic, and just incredibly powerful. Again, George Grosz, these were the people that I've always, especially early on, the people who informed my work. When I was young, I wanted to change the world. I thought art could change the world. I was so naive. There's a bit of me that still thinks that we can. I don't know if there's enough really good satire out there. I don't think cartoons should be diminished. I think they're important. I think it's important. I think
We do make a big. So if Trump is doing his own inadvertent crazy act, if all you have to do is draw it, there's something that happens in the act of drawing, and the perfect person to exemplify that is Stan Mack, our pal. Stan just would go places, and if you remember him from The Village Voice, he'd just go places, show up, and just draw what he heard and what he saw. But just that moving that out of context was powerful. So if you did a book, say, of all of Trump's tweets, somebody must be working on it.
somebody must be
Are you
doing
doing
it.
it?
Yeah.
No, not
Just draw the tweets.
Yeah.
You don't have to make it up.
But no, it's true. Part of the problem for me is that I vacillate between not wanting him anywhere near my head. I don't want him in my head. I don't even want to hear his voice. I hear his voice on the TV and I have to turn it off. And yet wanting to expose what the things that he's doing. I don't know. And anyway, but another great political. So when I was
Say the
younger.
name, say who it is.
Oh, Ralph Steadman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another great empathic cartoon.
But I was never, well, anyway, I'm going to keep going. Russell Mills was another early hero of mine. He's an English illustrator. And we're going to, it's interesting, there's going to be a lot of overlap here. One of the things that I think informs, especially the work that I do on my own, is it's the way that we treat animals and the way that we treat the planet and how we're so disrespectful of other people, of other creatures on the planet and then the planet itself. So I am interested in anthropology and science and things like this, and I think this is incredible. I think this is like the great New Yorker booth cover last week of the gigantic elephant. It's fantastic. The thing that I love about Art Young is that these are 100 years old and they're just as relevant. This could be, this could be about the Republican Party. It's great, right? And then this one too. Talking about evolution and how we have or have not evolved. A lot of my own work is actually about that. It's about how, I'm just going to rant a little bit, but there was a while, I've been illustrating for many, many years, and then there was a point at which I started doing my own work because I could no longer sit and wait for the phone to ring, hoping that someone would give me my dream job, and have me do what I was thinking. So I started doing my own work, and what I was thinking about was, we're great apes. Why are we behaving this way? Because we are still so. We still have the remnants of our past, We can be the most incredibly brilliant species and also the most brutal. And so anyway, a lot of my own work has to do with that, but definitely this one, that's a great, great cartoon, And it's, again, just as relevant today. A lot of what makes this work so striking is that, again, this is something absolutely that you could print now. This one, I read the book over the holidays, and this one I thought was really cute. This was a book for children. It's called The Creepers, and this reminded me of when I was a kid, and we were looking at all those fairy tales that were really, like Struwwelpeter, and they were just horrible, and they all had terrible endings, and they were little morality stories, but they were absolutely terrifying. And this the idea that this was done for kids. This one is, say, if you Indians don't like our country, why don't you go back where you came from? Well, isn't that about as relevant as it gets these days? This is exactly what's going on now. If you look at YouTube, how many people are chastising other people for not speaking English. I mean, it's more as relevant as ever.
How about what Trump said today?
Oh God, what did he say? I don't know. I don't even know. What did he say?
He referred to whole nations of people as shithole countries.
See, this we have
He
to.
says, why don't
is-
we don't have immigration? Let's have them from Norway instead of from shithole countries. He actually did.
He said Haiti and I think it was Africa.
Haiti?
And he thinks Africa's a country.
So, it's limbo. How low can you go? It's a rushed limbo.
And I absolutely love the whole tree series too. I think it's extraordinary. You were saying that you were doing lithographs or something? Yeah, that's yeah, it's great.
Are these lithos, the tree thing?
No, but I mean, but I think you said that some of his drawings look like lithos. They look like if they're
one of the great avatars
It had to be. Yeah, that's
And
the
if they're-
system they had.
particularly like stone. Are you doing stone lithos? Yeah, that's what going to be kind of what it looks like. Yeah, but I mean they're gorgeous, and again going back to the theme of being stewards of the planet, and and having a connection with nature that we're completely ignoring to our own detriment. This is called Cathedral. I mean, I think this is gorgeous, and I think this is just a beautiful, a quiet statement about our about our relationship to nature as anything.
Yeah,
Yeah, and another one.
yeah.
Just Steve said to talk a little bit about our own work too, but so, there was a time where I sort of realized that my work was very much of a time, like you could tell just even by the clothing, like when it was done. But I think any artist, I'm sure, we want to get to some deeper truths, and that's what I love about his work. I mean, he's doing things that are more timeless. They're not just, well, so and so did this and so did this, but I think they're just gorgeous and organic, and I mean, that's it's just a stunning piece.
What empathy he has.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
He's all
it.
empathy. Even
Yeah.
when he's angry,
Yeah.
he's still feeling all kinds of things
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, and the work is powerful and meaningful and has a message. It's beautifully rendered, and it has an emotional component too, don't you think? Like it's really, you feel it, like you can feel that.
See what kind of a person he was. You can feel him as a human being.
He was a compassionate person, yeah. So I mean, and it's really sad that sometimes the world isn't as kind to some compassionate people as it might be. I hate the idea that he didn't have a lot of money, and I hate the idea that he, you know what I mean? Like I hate the idea that it took 100 years to get this great book out. It makes me sad. I'm going to show just a few of my early pieces, because my early pieces was when I was really looking at a lot of this great work, and I actually had some of both of your work in here, but I thought I have to keep it shorter, because I was looking at
Keep
both
this
of
on
your
a
work
high
big
basis,
time.
yeah.
Oh. Okay, but I mean, this one I put up here because I did this many years ago, and then I read somewhere a couple days ago that people are being prepared about what to do in the case of nuclear annihilation. It's happening again. Like here's deja vu again. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about this stuff. A very early painting about women in the troubles that we have in society. This was a cover of Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Thank you. I think my work was a lot darker then, but I really, I mean, it's hard to be published when your work is that dark. Although back then I got a lot of this stuff published. This was Rauka, a war criminal they found living in Toronto. He had never even changed his name. I mean, extraordinary.
It has an Arthur Szyk feel.
Oh, I saw that show. That's like,
Yeah.
my eyes are going. I can't believe that he could paint that beautifully. Anyway, so, and something else for that was, but I mean, I was really much darker. The work was a lot darker, and it was published. So that was for Rolling Stone, I think.
This is relevant today.
About pollution. Yes, see what I mean? But I mean, I think that was kind of, I sort of feel that this work was somehow informed by the work of people such as Art Young. Absolutely. I mean, I really feel, that's what I feel strongly about that. And, and again, this is an old piece about censorship, but it's something that we could be talking about today. We could be talking about all of this stuff today with what's going on. And then the cocaine trade between North and South America. So, this is still the work that I love doing the most. Here's thank you, Françoise, my first cover for the New Yorker. And again, and this goes back to, I did do this because I wanted to have it about paying homage to the people who were here first. And so it's called Mohawk Manhattan. And then some of the political work I've done. This guy, same guy. Bye-bye.
Another great state.
Oh dear. Okay, I don't know what else to show you. I still like doing politically oriented work. I feel like whenever I try to do something decorative, it doesn't work. I don't know. I like doing stuff that is more hard hitting.
Things without an editorial punch to it.
Yeah.
Without a,
that's what I want to do, and I think that's what I started doing, and I've sort of meandered all over the place. I know that you were. Like I did all kinds of stuff, rock and roll stuff, and I know you did like a wonderful portrait of Madonna and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, no more.
Yeah, no, I don't really do it anymore either. But anyway,
I think that it's an important thing to impress on art students that this idea about having a point of view and having the point of view being yours is a really legitimate thing to do. All that other stuff is just as legit, but you could get the feeling when you look at the annual shows and communication arts and American illustration, things like that, that's not acceptable. It's rude, but in some cases it's the ruder the better. The worse the times are in the country, the more it calls for sometimes drawing yellow shit.
Well, I think at the best art mirrors the times, and whether you're for or against something. It's just going to be that much more powerful if it's got a deeper meaning to it. Okay, so I'm just going to quick show you some personal projects I've been doing. So a lot of my personal stuff is sort of gender oriented, using. This has nothing to do with Art Young. This is just my stuff. This is called Stigmata, about the religious subjugation of women. And then again, I keep
Similar
going.
to that piece we saw before.
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is my version of monkeys. I actually work with primates. I volunteer within a primate sanctuary, and I'm very interested in, again, the similarities. Okay, so I have a friend who lives in New York, and she's a photographer. She's married to an anthropologist named Lionel Tiger, and he's the professor emeritus at Rutgers, and so we had brunch maybe a year ago, and I was so depressed and I was so demoralized, and I said, I can't believe Trump got in. How did Trump get in? And he said, of course Trump got in. He's the alpha male, and he's orange, like an orangutan. Like he saw it purely from those. And I thought, you don't think of it that way. Like
animal markers.
He saw that. He thinks in terms of always in terms of anthropology, and he thinks, of course, he would have won because an older, woman monkey was never going to, Anyway, enough about that.
I had a hair theory about politics. I always thought that the person with the most hair wins, or the tallest person wins. That's why I thought John Kerry was going to be president because he was taller and had more hair. So I don't say that anymore.
Okay. All right. And then I've been working toward a show, and this is a secular altarpiece, which is 12 feet wide.
Are
And
you getting yourself banned in Boston?
that's it.
Yeah.
What's in Boston?
You're getting... Are you finding any censorship on the religious liturgical monkey thing?
Not yet.
Not yet. Brilliant, both of you guys. Thank you so much. Very strong work, and I really see the powerful connections between your showing and Art Young. I'm hoping that we have helped art come alive here at the Society of Illustrators, which I do think. Anel, do you know if he was a member? Is he in the Hall of Fame?
No.
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 Something to think about. Anyway, we have a few minutes for questions. Not too many. Anel is way ahead of me. She's got another mic in the back, so please feel free to jump in with anything for any of us about art, whichever art you want to talk about. Yes.
Mr. Spiegelman, you mentioned there being a huge fraction in the left, and that this sort of congregated. It had something to do with Walt Disney of all people. When was this?
Oh, at his memorial, gathering together a few hundred people who would never be in a room with each other. Although Disney, I'm still trying to figure that one out. He was the major contributor for this, and I think just some artists that were animators said, "Hey, there's this guy who died. He's a good artist. You should give him some good send-off." But somehow, Disney's politics were about as far away from Art Young's as Trump is away from an advanced biped.
But maybe Disney, as a young man growing up, came at a time when people like him were learning a lot from Art Young, and they were admiring him, regardless of politics. And maybe
because
Disney's
he did manage
politics.
to do non-political cartoons as well, overtly political.
But also, Disney comes from the Midwest, and he's born
does
into the big progressive era.
That's
So
true.
his politics may have changed with his income.
Maybe. I mean, at some point, I think he was either a silver shirt
No?
or a supporter.
I read that it was a little unclear of whether Disney himself was anti-Semitic or if he just ran with an anti-Semitic crowd. He was certainly anti-communist, but it was a little unclear if he himself hated Jews or if he just had friends that, hated Jews, and
He
I
didn't
guess,
like my mentor, who was Jewish, a guy named Woody Gelman, who brought me into the bubblegum company that led ultimately to those Garbage Pail Kids I showed.
Yeah.
Great man, but he left because he was part of that unionizing activity. And he certainly not only hated communists, he did some stuff for the CIA. I mean, his politics couldn't be further away, and the fact that he either overcame it or didn't even know enough about Art Young to care, I just found it amazing that he threw this big bash.
And last year, an animator for Disney, a designer named Tyrus Wong, died, 106 years old. New York Times obit was fantastic. In fact, I give it as an assignment to my students. He was pushed out of Disney. He wasn't Japanese, but he was pushed out at the time of the war, after actually designing all of Bambi. Yeah, it's a hell of a, look him up. It's a great obit. What a story. And he lived to 106, had an interesting life, a very positive spirit. Tyrus Wong, R-O-W-O-N-G. Yeah. Great New York Times obit on him. Yeah, people are complex. There are a lot of people out there to love and hate. There's a lot of reconciling now. Great artists who have actually now come out have been revealed to be terrible to women. Do we not ever look at a Roman Polanski movie? That's a whole other conference. We're not going to go there, but I'm just, this is all very complicated stuff. Anybody else? Yeah.
You briefly mentioned Robert Minor.
Art did, but yeah.
And
We love
am
him.
I wrong in guessing that Young had a big influence on Minor, or were they just sort of
They were
running in
contemporaries
rough
and
parallel?
they were on the same side of the political spectrum,
Right.
which was a lot easier before the revolution than after, because this was the gathering of all progressives. That could include John Sloan and Robert Minor, who were really not in the same camp as things went on. But I think they come out of whatever that socialist tradition was of political cartoon. I don't know specific. I would think they're about the same age. So I don't know how the influence might have worked.
And sort of a vaguely related, it's sort of talking about socialists and cartoons. What about the wobbly cartoonists from the IWW? Did they influence Young or vice versa? Do you know?
Again, all I know is fellow travelers, and as I remember, like the stuff I've seen by the IWW artists wasn't first rate. Like this stuff is. I mean, Robert Minor on the one hand, and Stuart Davis and John Sloan, as well as obviously Art Young. But I could be wrong about that. It's not like I ever made a real study of it. It's just that when I was coming up in underground comics, thanks to Spain Rodriguez, the guy who did Trash Man and sometimes wasn't nice to women in his comics, but was a great cartoonist. He got the underground cartoonists connected with what was left of the Wobblies in San Francisco, and we became the International Cartoon Workers of the World. It was on a lot of comic books at the time, and they were happily trying to organize us.
Also, this is a time of many newspapers. There were 15 newspapers in New York. Even when I was a kid, I remember 8 or 9. And think about every union, how many papers there were. So there was a place to be bad. and that's a very important thing, you know. Now we have the internet, and that's certainly giving you opportunities to be bad. But I'm looking back on Art Young and Robert Minor, I'm amazed at how well they've stood up. They are still top of the line.
You know, what Occupy Wall Street needed was Art Young, as with Bernie Sanders. It needed an image. And like they were so wary of...
They also needed a song.
That would have been great.
They needed an image,
I
a
think
song.
they needed a linguist to make a simple message. Don't you think? Like a
Linguists, they were just using hand signals. You know, they were a very primitive stage. But I thought, like, they came up with a cartoon. It's called The 1%. And that was useful. But a visualization of that would have been even more useful for letting tote bags and T-shirts carry the word wherever they went.
Maybe we can start a committee here to help them for the next go-around. I think there's definitely something to be done with
They
that.
had Woody Guthrie perform one night, kind of spontaneously, and Woody Guthrie and.
There you go.
Oh, this isn't a question. It's not really, but just in terms of the music, I was like 14, but I kind of ended up going up with this big crowd, and it was like this sort of midnight Woody Guthrie performance that all of Occupy Wall Street from Zuccotti went up to see in Columbus Circle. Pete Seeger was also there.
Woody
But-
would not have made that performance. I don't think, yeah, but
I'm saying Woody, I mean Arlo, I'm so sorry.
Arlo, really?
Arlo Guthrie and Pete Seeger, not Woody, obviously. I'm sorry.
I just thought people were singing his songs. or
No,
something.
no, Arlo Guthrie was actually there, and Pete Seeger right before he died. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, Pete was one of these guys. He was from that time. That's that same spirit.
But they were so much older than like the youth of the movement was supposed to be. It was kind of like there should have been a.
Well, there's something
younger
beautiful
champion.
and poetic and futile about the way this all worked because they were so pure. You know, they didn't want political power. They just wanted to like call attention to the essential
You're
inequities.
speaking of these guys, this group.
I'm
You're
speaking
talking
about
Occupy.
Occupy.
Occupy, okay.
No, these people were out for a revolution. The people we've been looking at.
Yeah. No, they were serious. I think a lot of Occupy people would have been very happy to have that movement grow. It's just that nobody really knew what the next step was going to be. But things have a way of finding, you know, their own shape in the future. Politics is a force of nature, and we're seeing it now. And so those who want to do graphics and want to join the power of what's coming, take a good look at Art Young. Take a good look at the work of our colleagues, and go forth and be loud. I want to thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, please come up and address us personally.
And the beautiful book is for sale in the museum shop.
Yes, by all means, it is a gem. Thank
And
you
I'm
all
sure
very
you guys
much.
would sign
Thank
it.
you.